We've thought all year that we lived in interesting times, but boy, did it just get more interesting. One of the things that's interesting is that there's been such a crisis of authority. Authorities of all sorts are certainly being questioned more. It's almost as though people have had enough of experts. And part of why this is happening, well, some basic psychology about how we find truth. I've heard the phrase a lot recently that we're in a post-truth society. And when people say that, they don't mean that we in general are post-truth. They mean that they over there are post-truth. So why does this happen? Today I'll be talking about capitalism, morality, and politics. 3 topics that arouse a lot of passion, a lot of partisan identity, and therefore that drive a lot of, I would say, post-truth thinking. I'll start with a very, very simple psychological point, which is that in general, what we believe drives what we perceive. It's kind of a miracle that our brains are able to process the world in real time. Our slow neural circuits are able to give us an instant reading of what's out there in the world. It's really quite miraculous when you look at the anatomy of the eye and how slow the nerves are. And one of the ways that this happens is that the brain is always making guesses. Your brain is always trying to guess what's out there. So one of the reasons why we have these problems with truth is that what we believe drives what we perceive. It's a miracle that we can look out at the world and instantly get a perception of what's out there. We don't know that we've constructed it on the fly. We think that's what's really there. So when I teach psychology, I like to use this simple optical illusion. If you look at this, there's 2 ways to process it. How many of you, when you first looked at that, how many of you instantly saw 3 partially eaten pizzas? Raise your hand if that was the way you read that. Okay, raise your hand if you saw a triangle on a 3-star. Okay, so your brain automatically makes that reading of this otherwise ambiguous figure. Now, part of the reason that this illustration is so compelling is that many people are able to see the lines. Can you raise your hand if you can just see those faint lines completing the triangle? Raise your hand high. Okay, so as some of you may know, those lines are not actually there, and I can make them go away by doing that. Now just watch that again. If you keep your eye on the line, and I'm going to make it go away, it's not going to blink off, it's going to fade. Okay, so watch it. Get your eye on one of those lines, and I'll block the other 2 circles. Ready? Did you see it fade away? Because what's happening is that our brains evolved to guide us through a 3-dimensional world, and our brain makes the guess that if it sees a pattern like that, most likely there's something blocking something else. So your brain makes a guess, it then tries to confirm the guess, and even the little fluctuations of light on your retina are then magnified. Even though they're not there, they are magnified so that you actually perceive lines there. You fill in the blanks. You don't even care. You don't care whether it's a triangle or a pizza. You don't care. But yet your brain is doing this confirmation bias thing. It takes a guess, it confirms it, you're done, you see it, it's there. So what happens when you do care? What happens when the world is ambiguous and you actually want one outcome to be true? Well, let's find out. A very interesting study was published 2 years ago by some economists at Columbia University. And they did this very interesting procedure for figuring out, over 1,000 economists, I believe it was, what their politics are, based on their publications and originally from voter records, which economists are on the left or the right. And then they looked at their published papers, and to the extent that economists, it's partly a bit of a normative discipline, that is, you might say what you think is right, but it's mostly supposed to be a descriptive discipline where you're trying to describe the economic behavior. And so basic questions that we all face, or that we discuss. In America, we have a long, long debate. Should we raise the minimum wage? And if you're an economist on the left, you say, of course. But if you're an economist on the right, you say, this is Econ 101. If you raise the price of something, people will buy less of it, and they'll substitute in other inputs, like machines, rather than laborers for $15 an hour. So what these authors did was they coded the published papers of many, many economists, and they looked at all the things that they could quantify that are political footballs. So, for example, a quote from the article, we collect estimates of taxable income elasticities, labor supply elasticities, minimum wage employment elasticities, etc. And these are all things that have policy implications. And the question is, if you know the politics of an economist, can you guess what they think these numerical variables are? And the answer is yes. The correlation is not gigantic, but there is a correlation. So this is just an example, one of many that I could bring to your attention, of how experts believe that they are objective, they believe they're processing the world as it is, but the stories that they bring, the values they bring, the goals that they bring drive what they see. If what we believe drives what we perceive, for economists, politicians, and lay people, what do people on the left and the right believe about capitalism? We're in a time of possible secular stagnation, some people say, a time of populist revolt. There's a lot of rethinking of economic policies, and this is being conducted by creatures like us who can't really think straight as individuals. We think in part as teams. So what are the stories that the two or more teams are bringing in as we think about economics, public policy, and capitalism?